Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS in.form. Joining us again in the studio as the legislation wraps up or starts to wrap up is State Senator Mark Messmer representing District 48. Senator, welcome to the show.
Great to be here as always.
Well, I guess now we're down just the last few days next week and then things pretty well wrap up.
Yep.
So let's talk about a little bit what has been happening over the past few weeks. And you wanted in particular to talk about how some things maybe sometimes can get put through that you don't really realize.
I think we had a good lesson in the legislative process and how it can go really awry if somebody has the desire to be mischievous with the process. So I got more phone calls and emails the last couple weeks on a bill. It was called Senate Bill 162, and it was a bill that has mushroomed and blown up to could really anybody. And the way it ended up as it left the House committee, anybody who provides any medical staff, any volunteers, any vendors who provide any service of any kind to a hospital, not just the people who work directly with patients, but anybody who enters the building would be forced to get immunizations. And it started out, and really any immunization the hospital determines they want. And and when that bill passed out of the Health Committee, then the phones really lit up last week. And I thought, how in the heck did this bill get to this point? And I remember that bill coming through the Senate in late January or early February on our last couple days of session. And when I read the bill, I mean, when we get bills there for final passage, I'll read the digest, and then I always have my staff people put together the transcription from the committee hearing. Because usually the authors won't always tell you, the discussion that happened in committee, and if people were there to oppose it, and what the arguments for it. But when you get the transcriptions from the committee hearing, you get all that. So I have my staff pull that. I don't know if anybody else does. I don't think anybody else does, but I want it. So she started reading through the bill, and when it left the Senate committee, it was at that point it was if you were a hospital worker in direct contact with patients, then the hospital had for chickenpox, flu, mumps, measles, rubella, and tetanus, tetanus and whooping cough. Those four, if you were in direct contact with patients, they could require you to get them, and it had one religious exemption if you had religious objections to immunizations. And I read through that and I thought, man, nobody showed up in committee to oppose that, and unanimous vote out of committee, and it was Senator Miller's last bill she was going to be authoring, the last bill to be presented, and it was this nice warm fuzzy, let's give Senator Miller all these kumbayas for all her years of hard work, 32 years in the Senate and retiring this year. And I mean, I was reading through it, and the alarm bells were kind of going off in my head, but I looked up, at that point the bill's going up for vote and all the lights are green, and I'm like, maybe I'm just misinterpreting something here. Maybe nobody's really upset about this, but it seemed like it could cause some. When you force immunizations on folks, there tends to be some reaction to that. So I thought, it's either going to be 49-1 or 50-0. My vote isn't going to make any difference either way. But I was not real comfortable with how that played out. And then the next day and weeks, emails started coming in from hospital employees who were, what the heck? Why are we being forced to get this done? And
because the bill changed.
The bill
from what it
changed.
Originally said it was going into committee with.
Yeah, because and I thought, well, I replied back to him. I said, why didn't anybody complain in committee? And they said, well, we didn't know, short notice and this and that. And so then I went back and I thought, something doesn't smell right with this. So I went back and I looked back in January when she filed her bill. This is what the bill said when she filed it, and why when she scheduled the hearing it didn't get anybody's attention. the original bill says, in a hospital employee immunizations, it requires a hospital to make available to be administered certain immunizations to a hospital employee at the hospital employee's request. So if I'm working at a hospital and I feel like I need it for my protection and I want it, the hospital has to provide it. I think that's already current law, you know, because if my employees want hepatitis shots or whatever because we do plumbing work on drain lines, I mean, I think OSHA rules require me to provide immunizations that my employees would need for protection as well.
If they want
them. If they want them.
If they ask
If
for
they
them.
want them.
Okay.
If they don't want them, I don't make them. So that's how the bill started. You read it, and I thought, I mean, when I went back and read it, I thought, well, that's why nobody came to complain, because when she scheduled that, who would complain about that? It sounded great. You know, and then in committee, it got amended to if you're a hospital employee in direct contact with a patient, then you have to take flu, chickenpox, tetanus, and measles, mumps, you know, and you have to take it. And I thought, you know, being a very, very limited amount of people, and you know, that it impacted people, you know, if you're a intensive care nurse and whatever. I mean, I thought, well, that seems a little bit of a stretch, but nobody seemed upset. Nobody testified against it, not knowing that's not what the bill was when it was filed. Then it gets to the House last week in Health Committee, and it went from kind of borderline to then in the Health Committee in the House, it got changed to anyone who provides services for a hospital, including physicians, volunteers, your teenage son or daughter who goes to volunteer to work down in the lobby, who changes bedpans, residents, temporary workers, students, or vendors. Well, Bill, you and I are vendors that provide services to the hospital. And it not only said, you know, and before it was for employees who routinely got changed to routinely have contact with a patient, and then it got added, or an employee or contractor of a hospital who does not have direct contact with a patient is still required. So anybody who walks, you know, through the doors of a hospital to provide any service, it could be the guy who provides copy paper, the guy who picks up the laundry, the guy who, you know, the delivery guy, everybody that touches a hospital ground. And then it not only had the 4 vaccinations that were in the original bill, it got added, or any other immunization as determined by the hospital. So, starts with a very innocuous bill, gets heard the first time, gets slipped in.
It gets changed
in the committee, goes to the House, gets put on steroids, and when I called the House Healthcare Committee chairman after this came out of the House committee, she said the hearing in the committee was, to her surprise, quite angry from people who showed up to protest about it or complain about it, and she was surprised. So at this point, the bill has, we're in that conference committee time that I don't think that bill is going to be able to be concurred, by the Senate membership. But since that first set of language passed the Senate, it can be tacked into some other bill that has germane content. So, it's one of these, until the final bell rings, until the final gavel hits, that initial language of if you're a direct contact hospital worker, I mean, it could still show up. Now, so we have to remain diligent. But people say, how does something like that pass? Well, that's how something like that passes.
Kind of a sneaky way of doing it.
When you're trying to be deceptive.
And somebody benefits from this somehow, somebody that's providing those vaccines.
Yes.
So I'm sure that there's some, we wonder about the political process, and whilst it is there to help us and to do things the right way, there are those who take advantage of that. And change.
Yeah, a great lesson in civics of how things can happen and how something can slip through the cracks if people aren't paying attention. And thank goodness when the bill got scheduled for the House committee at that point, it was still just nurses in direct contact. Well, people didn't know because they don't have to post the amendments to the public until just hours before the hearing. So there's no way anybody knew that bill, and it was ugly when the hearing was scheduled with just the nurses in direct contact, much less the amendment that they put on in the House Health Committee that opened it up to everybody who walks in the door of a hospital.
Now, I guess we got to watch to make sure it didn't get snuck onto something else.
Correct.
Because that's another way.
Oh, yeah.
Is that called pork barrel?
Well,
in a way, I know there's some of that some pork barrel.
I mean, we do have rules that it has to be amended to a bill that is similar in content.
Okay. No, it needs to be a health bill of some sort.
It has to be a health bill of some kind, but we'll have to watch very closely to make sure it doesn't try to show up in any committee reports from a conference committee.
So watch it close. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about some good things that are going on in the House and the Senate.
It looks like the transportation bill we covered in a lot of detail last week. It looks like that bill is moving through. I couldn't tell you for sure which bill number, who's going to take ownership, who's going to get, whatever bill it has, that author is going to get credit for, whatever transportation funding mechanisms we agree to. So whether it's House Bill 1001, House Bill 1010, Senate Bill 67, Senate Bill 333, those were all bills that had different pieces and parts of the transportation funding mechanisms. But the items we talked about with local money, locals getting more money, the state getting more money, a couple of pieces of agreement on long-term, funding options that are out there for locals, and then a study committee, a task force to hammer out and bring to the General Assembly, some concrete long-term solutions during our budget session next year. So that looks like it's in pretty good shape. Probably be one of the last things we, get brought back out of conference committee time, because when that's done, I think we're all going to be pretty well ready to, to leave, and if something gets left unfinished, it's just unfinished and bring it back next year. Okay. But a bill that does look like it's pretty well close to final details is the body camera bill. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about it maybe early in the session, but that one has some pretty good. It was discussed heavily during fall study committee time. Started with the House bill, we amended it in the Senate, but it'll basically put the burden of proof on law enforcement. If they need to keep a video from a police body cam or a vehicle camera from being disclosed to the public, they've got to prove to a judge, if they try to keep it disclosed, they need to prove the burden of proof why they need to keep it from being released. Even if it's not going to be released, we've got procedures in place of who can view the video. Mm-hmm. They won't be able to get a copy, but if it's being held, without public release, the person involved or the family of the person involved or, the attorneys of the people, anybody who is directly involved in what happened in that video or their family can get to it to view it, even if it's not being released. It has procedures in place of who can request a copy, and then how long either law enforcement has to keep it, or if you have a public entity that's not the state. Whether, I guess, anybody who's potentially capturing, footage like that, from law enforcement side of things, how long they have to maintain the record, because if there's time you could request a copy, there's either a 180-day or 270-day time period for either different levels of law enforcement to maintain that record, and then if there's something part of a lawsuit or part of a legal proceeding, that they've got to keep that record intact, until it plays out. Okay. So that looks like it's pretty well coming together. That's House Bill 1019, and it's done in a pretty good balanced way. So I feel pretty good about that one. And a couple of my bills, did pass this week, and one that's still in conference committee. So hopefully that'll get knocked out early next week and get it all done and resolved. So been a good session overall, and a lot of good work for the taxpayers.
And for those who are wondering, this is a short session. Next year will be a long session,
Yeah.
which means you go until April.
April 29th, I think, during budget session. This year we'll get done. We were supposed to get done on the 14th. I knew that was a Monday, and I could tell everybody, the latest we'd get done was, in reality, probably going to be Friday the 11th. And now we're scheduled to get done either the 9th or 10th next week. Okay. So Wednesday, Thursday would be the latest, but could likely be Wednesday evening if we stick to it hard and run a late night. Wednesday night might get out of there, the 9th, but by the 10th for sure we'll be done.
And we can look forward to you coming back next week, kind of giving us a summary of how the whole year went.
Exactly.
Things that definitely did pass, and whether this bill that got snuck through, maybe we'll know more about.
Hopefully we don't hear of that one anymore.
Hopefully it'll die out. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in, Senator.
Yep, my pleasure.
We appreciate it. Our guest has been State Senator Mark Messmer on WJTS-Inform. We're local people watching local people.